Okay, so we've finally crossed a hurdle. We've gotten through the Roman Empire, and we are moving on to the early Christian art and to late antiquity. So I'm going to tell you some basics about Christianity um, and how it spreads in the Roman Empire. So here, the map that you're looking at, the orange areas are areas in which Christianity had a good solid start. And then as time went on and we get closer to about 3 to 500, you see the yellow parts fill in. Those yellow parts represent areas that converted to Christianity. So in the Roman Empire, up until this time, there were really only two religions that were majority religions, meaning that the majority of people practiced either paganism or Judaism. There were lots of other small religions that didn't make a whole lot of headway, whose followers sort of came up and then went away. But the two religions that survived and had a strong following were Judaism and paganism. Christianity was born out of Judaism because Jesus was Jewish. So basics about Christianity. Let's start with this. Christianity believes in a God that has three parts. The first would be the God that is in the heavens. The second part is the God that came to earth. And the third part is the Holy Spirit. The God that came to earth's name is Jesus. The God that's in the heavens is God. And the Holy Spirit is usually represented by a dove in artwork. So we call that the Trinity, or the Trinity component of Christianity. Jesus was a Jew who taught Christian teachings and who was born in a small corner of the Roman Empire. His mom was Mary, and his father was Joseph. His earthly father was Joseph. Mary was his biological mother and earthly mother. Now, Christians believe in Jesus' divine conception, or immaculate conception, which means that Mary got pregnant without having to have sex to conceive Jesus. Jesus begins teaching at the age of 13, and he's crucified at the age of 30. His followers continue his teachings and spread out geographically. This encompasses a lot of land and evangelizing. This creates a wave of converts, and Christianity spreads like wildfire. In 30 AD, when Jesus was crucified, there were roughly 3,000 Christians practicing in private. They're practicing in private because up until this time, Christianity, not even up until this time, until Constantine legalizes Christianity, Christianity is illegal. So they have to practice religion in private. By the 4th century, that's a little under 300 years, there were 6 million Christians. So it went from 3,030 AD to 6 million Christians. Christians believe that Jesus was crucified, and after the crucifixion, he transcended into heaven. The spread of Christianity was remarkable, and until now, religion really had only been for people with money, meaning that in order to have a faith in paganism, you had to be able to afford to sacrifice something major like your best calf or your best crop or the money to build a temple or something that you could give as a gift to the gods. And so Christianity comes along and says, hey, I'm willing to encompass you as a faithful person, whether you have the money to dedicate temples to me or not. And so instead of religion being for the top 10% of the people of the Roman Empire, it becomes a religion for the masses. The Roman Empire controlled an enormous amount of land in the Mediterranean, Europe, and North Africa, and most Roman emperors had difficulty protecting the vast amount of land that they controlled. Threat of invasion was always a concern, and in the north, the Goths were the main concern. In the southern part of the empire, the Turks were a constant threat. So what did everybody want to control so badly? They wanted to control Carthage, the northern ports of Africa, because whoever controlled the northern ports of Africa were able to control trade in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Another issue the Roman emperors faced was controlling the religious groups that were growing in followers rapidly. Christianity was growing in terms of followers. We just talked about that. The faith began to emerge as a world religion in about 300 AD, and by 650 it had more than tripled in number of followers. Islam becomes a major force in religion in 650 AD, and the Jewish people are still a major religion. The biggest concern of an emperor was an uprising. Religions had the ability to unite people in great numbers, and the local rulers were often trying to keep control of the religious groups who wanted to take over local regions. So your book explains the basics of each religion. I encourage you to use your textbook as a resource for that. It even has a timeline of Jesus's life, so that when you are looking at the images that I'm getting ready to show you, you'll see that you'll know more about the background story. So the slide that you're looking at now is a Delve Deeper activity. It will be in the Delve Deeper PowerPoint. You can copy and paste that link to learn more about how Christianity spreads in the Roman Empire. Here you see a little cartoon sort of about the spread of Christianity. I thought it was funny. So if you like it, get a giggle. If not, just move on past it. Here is a basic timeline of Jesus's life. I'm just showing it to you to give you some background information. So this is the church at Dura Europos. Dura Europos was a city in Jerusalem, and it was a city in Syria. And it is the oldest surviving Jewish synagogue that we know of. The Jewish people practiced their faith in house churches. They did that because their religion was also illegal. So even after Christianity was legalized, Judaism was still illegal. And so the emperors wanted the Roman Empire to all follow the same religion. They knew if they weren't united in that they would have a divided country. And so Jewish people practiced their faith in private, in churches behind closed doors. The church changes hands many times between Romans and other groups, and the people that build Dura Europos were run out of town, leaving their art behind them. And so because they were run out of town, we still have this church that they practiced in. The Jewish faith used the color purple as a status symbol to show wealth, and the Jews at Dura Europos create a synagogue from a private house. Jewish works of art are discovered sporadically in various places during late antiquity. This is due to the fact that the Jewish population was persecuted heavily in late antiquity, and therefore they were constantly moving to escape persecution. You can see in the house church an assembly room to the far left. The assembly room was a place where they all gathered. The teaching area was a place where mostly men gathered and listened to the rabbis speak. The courtyard was very much like one of the open-air courtyards that we saw in Pompeii. And then you see a baptistry and stairs that go to the upper floor. So we know it had two floors. There was an entrance to the side, but it was a very controlled entrance, only one way in and one way out. The thing that they left behind that were so beautiful were the frescoes that they left behind. They're all done in second style wall painting, and you can see that signature color palette that we saw in second style wall painting with that orangish red, which is a persimmon color, the forest green, and then of course this beautiful amberish gold color. Early Christian art has elements of other cultures. We call this syncretism. When one culture takes a thing from another culture and makes it their own, incorporates it into their own way of life and their own ideologies, we call that syncretism. Even though there's quite a bit of syncretism, and we see that the Roman art and the Christian art tend to create a blend, it is illegal to show Christ on the cross. And that is because of that religious uprising that we've talked about. And we also see this aftermath that incorporates interesting variables of mythology in the art. Here you can see the detail of the fresco that we were just looking at. This is a detail of the story of Jonah and a detail of St. Peter. The story of Jonah is particularly interesting representation in this particular motif or this particular fresco painting. And the reason it's particularly interesting has to do with the overall idea that I told you before, that the Christians are taking what they know and modifying it to tell the stories of their religion. Beyond that, we see a phenomenon in art that happens when one culture takes something from another culture and makes it their own. It's called syncretism. So the syncretism here is that they're taking reference from Greek and Roman mythology and they're making it their own to add the Christian stories to it. Anytime you see these strange looking mythological presentation of Christian material, it begins to feel wonky. That wonkiness we call syncretism. It seems wonky to us because it's part of our Western world and part of our Western culture. To someone who doesn't know as much about Western culture, it might not seem wonky at all. What you're looking at is Jonah coming out of the whale. The creature that has eaten him is not very whale-like looking. But my thought process there is they've probably never seen a whale. This is in Rome. Rome doesn't naturally have whales. So it's likely that it's just because they've never actually seen a whale. This is the cubiculum in the catacomb of Saints Peter and Marcellina. It is a shot of the cubiculum. It's a shot of the entire room. So it feels you're looking at it the way it would have been in antiquity. You can see the entire room. You can see where the catacombs were, where the bodies were buried. That's where the holes are there. And you can see the Roman style wall painting. This is all second style wall painting. It gives you a better understanding of what they looked like in antiquity. This is the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus. It's from Rome, Italy. And it's quite an incredible piece of artwork. It has 10 figural scenes done in high relief. And it's syncretism as well. If you remember, we looked at some Roman sarcophagi in which the Roman sarcophagus had images of people and different myths on them. And so now the Christians have taken that tradition of having an elaborate carved sarcophagus and dedicating the scenes to stories within the Bible. In this case, we have 10 figural scenes, all done in high relief. The compartments depict the life of Jesus and other biblical accounts. Junius Bassus is the one who is buried inside the sarcophagus. And that burial, or the fact that Junius Bassus is buried in there, you wouldn't know that unless you knew or unless you knew that somebody was buried inside of it. Like, you wouldn't know that this was necessarily a sarcophagus. Why is that important? Because if you remember, if you think back to our Roman days, in Rome, everything had the individual's name plastered all over it. In this case, Junius Bassus is making a sacrifice to tell the biblical stories and not honor himself. This is a Christian value, to be humble and to not, supposedly make a large name out of your own thing. Instead, to make a dedication to God by presenting stories that are important to God. The biblical accounts that you see are done in high relief, and they have interesting events in the life of Jesus. The only point that you can see that Junius Bassus is buried in the sarcophagus has to do with the writing, I believe, on the top. It declares Junius Bassus's Christianity. You can see it. It runs around the edge of the lid. And it comes from that Roman tradition where they build those arches, the oh boy, it won't come to me. The triumphal arches, in which they honor an emperor, and they put that information all on the arch. Junius was newly baptized, and the inscription around the lid of the sarcophagus states so. The scenes reflect Roman architectural developments. You can see that in the Corinthian columns that separate the scenes. You can see that in the way that the figures are dressed, in the sort of architectural way that the scenes are divided. In the top register, you see Christ preaching as a teacher with Paul. There are Old Testament and New Testament scenes. In the bottom, you see the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and the flight into Egypt. Also included in the scenes that reference pagan themes that early Christians turn into Christian themes, such as wine representing the Eucharist and the small angels that we call putti. We see references to classical mythology interwoven into the scenes with the Christian story to create a fusion of Roman and Christian art. Here's a close-up of one of the panels in the upper register. It is Jesus stepping on the head of a figure, and two men surround him. What I want you to notice about the figures is how large their heads and hands are. They are referencing that Roman tradition of depicting plebeian people with large heads and large hands and squatty bodies. We're back to that depiction because, remember, Christianity was a religion for all people, and therefore, because the religion was for all people, they want to appeal to the major masses that are their followers, who are plebeian. You can see that they're dressed in the Roman style with large drapery or large draping robes. Jesus steps on the top of the head of a character. People have made arguments that that character is Moses, but I think that that character is Zeus, and it represents the triumph of Christianity over paganism. However, I do not have any research to back that up. It is simply my hunch. This next slide is a detail from the sarcophagus as well, and it is the detail of Adam and Eve. You can see the architectural framework that surrounds the presentation of the story. You can see that Adam and Eve are both, this is the moments after they ate the apple and have been presented with the knowledge of sin. The serpent has broken off as a condition issue, and the apple is no longer there. The apple probably was in the serpent's mouth. And Adam and Eve are covering their genital areas to signify that this is a moment after they have begun to understand original sin. Here's a restored cutaway of the old St. Peter's in Rome. The old St. Peter's was built where the new St. Peter's is now, and it was built as a basilica. So we go all the way back to the basilica that Trajan built for the Forum of Trajan. This basilica is based off of the Forum of Trajan, and that becomes a very important entity because from now until modern contemporary church building today, churches usually build in the basilica style. This particular church is built by Constantine, and Peter is believed to be buried here. The present St. Peter's recognizes the burial place of Peter. Old St. Peter's in Rome was able to house about 4,000 worshipers. And that's important because it speaks to the growth of Christianity in rapid numbers. So they needed a cathedral that was large, that could house a large number of people. This is the place where Christ was said to have directed Peter to build a church. Here you can see the floor plan of Old St. Peter's. It has all of the same properties that we would see in a church. As you enter the church, number 5 there is the narthex. As you walk into the doors, the main aisle down the way, the number 1 is the nave. The nave is the center aisle that usually leads to the altar, which is there right before you get to the number 3. And then number 4, we call the transept. At the point where the transept and the nave meet, this is called the transept crossing. Number 3 is an apse. And typically the altar sat in front of the apse. So this is the Church of Santa Costanza in Rome. You can see that the exterior of the church, and this is true of all early Christian churches, is not all that interesting. The bricks are not something that are decorative. We don't see a whole lot of decoration on the outside. What we do see is sort of just a plain building. That plain facade was done on purpose. They feel that if they have a plain exterior and you walk into the building and the building is transforming and very beautiful, it will feel as if you are being transformed into the heavenly realm. The interior of Santa Costanza is quite beautiful. The ceilings are tiled, and they create with beautiful little tiles called tesserae, and they create these beautiful patterns on the ceiling. It has a dome in the center, and there's a clerestory underneath the dome. It has double side aisles, double central aisles, and as you go into the center, that's where the altar is. That's where worship actually takes place, or the transfiguration takes place of the ceremony of the wine and the bread turning into the body and blood of Christ. It is set up currently for a wedding. And so what you're seeing here is images of the church set up for a wedding. That's why the chairs are all around the center. The interior had capitals that had Corinthian columns to them. It has an ambulatory. An ambulatory is the walkway that goes all the way around the center of the church, or walks. It's a way to walk completely around the church without disturbing what's going on in the middle, which would be Mass. It's full of barrel vaulting, and it's a central plan. A central plan church is just a church basically that's round or that has an equal transept and nave. This was originally a mausoleum for Constantine's niece, but now it's a church. This mausoleum for Santa Costanza used a floor plan that was borrowed from the ancient times of the Tholos. If you want to go backwards in time, the next building backwards in time would have been Hadrian's Pantheon. And then further back would have been the ancient Greeks who built the Tholos temples. So it's basically got a round central plan with a vertical access. The barrel vaulting is highlighted by the beautiful mosaics that reference mythological themes to symbolize the Eucharist. And the building's interior is entirely sheathed in marble and mosaic. This is just a detail of the capital of the columns. I don't expect you to know it. I just thought you might find it to be interesting. And this is an interior shot of the ceiling mosaic at Santa Costanza. You should recognize the grape leaves and the little blue creatures dancing in the wine as syncretism. It is syncretism because it is a symbol for the Eucharist, or the wine, which is the symbol for the blood of Christ. And the little blue devil-looking creatures are squishing the grapes in the tent to create fermented wine. The grapes are being harvested to the left of that by this interesting little monkey creature and a man who is directing the gathering of the harvest. Santa Costanza is pictured in the center, and then you see the grapevines moving all around. This is the quintessential fusion of Rome and Christian motif together. It's that the synthesis that we talked about, and is typical of early Christian art. If you get an even closer look, you'll see some little blue angels in the vining, and you'll see some little birds that fly around in the grapevines. So this is the floor plan of Santa Costanza. You can see it's circular. Now, it does have some similarities in terms of church parts, right? Because the entrance is the narthex, the center is the altar, and the walkway that is around the church called the ambulatory is still there. Now, I told you about the clerestory, so this is a cutaway. You can see here where the clerestory is. We call this area where the dome is the rotunda, and you can see where the altar is in the ambulatory. So this is one of the very rare occasions that you will see Jesus hung on the cross in early Christian art because it was illegal. We don't have many of these that survive. This was a lid of a small box. It is about 3 by 4 inches, just a little bit bigger than a 3, or a little bit smaller than a 3 by 5 index card. And you can see the story of the crucifixion played out on the lid. You have Jesus there hanging at the cross with the Roman letters that say King of the Jews. You have the Roman official that is doing the crucifixion, and then Mary and John, I believe, at Jesus's side. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's Mary and James. James is Jesus's brother, and when Jesus dies, he directs James to take care of his mother. You see the person hanging from the tree, that is Judas, and the gold coin are underneath his feet. This work of art capitalizes on the plebeian style. They're short, squatty people with big heads and big hands. The feet are a little bit large, but in general, the style of the people are very plebeian. This is done on purpose because Christianity was a religion for all people. Most of the art that they would be looking at to resurrect were plebeian art. I have this theory that if you were trying to create a wave of converts, you would probably do it with something that they were familiar with, not something that feels foreign to them. And so because they were familiar with the plebeian style art, it makes sense that they would have used plebeian style motifs. Now, most of the artists who are doing these type of carvings or making Christian style art are plebeian themselves. Because we talked about the fact that Christian art, or that Christianity spread amongst the plebeians the quickest. Here you see the interior of a church, the Church of Sant Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna, Italy. You can see you're looking straight down the nave right now at the apse, and there is an altar that fits into the apse. The ceiling has something that we call coffers. They are indented ceiling tiles with decoration in them. You see a clerestory here, right above this. Well, above the barrel vault arches, above the barrel vaults, there is a row of mosaic, and then above the row of mosaic is where your clerestory is. We're going to come back to this church, but for now, just keep it in the back of your head. So this is the tomb of Galla Placidia. It is the mausoleum. It's a mausoleum, and it's in Ravenna. Right now, what you're looking at is an exterior view, and you can see once again that early Christian building style of just a very plain exterior. It is the very first attempt that we've seen of a church that's trying to get at the central church plan, which is a church plan in which the transept and the nave are the same length. So they look more like a square than they do a circle in terms of the floor plan. Galla Placidia was a businesswoman. She owned a business in Italy, and she would have been a very important, prominent member of the community. When you enter the mausoleum, you see the beautiful mosaics that cover the ceiling. You see the mosaic tiles that cover the barrel vaults with just beautiful imagery on them. We see that the mosaic tile patterns encompass this area called the lunette, or that half moon shape that is above the tomb. And the detailed mosaic pictures tend to be common in Christianity. The walls are lined with a flat cut of marble. It's basically a big sheet of marble that's sliced thinly and placed on the wall. We call it spolia. That's S-P-O-L-I-A. The ceilings have intricate patterning, creating small tiles that shine brilliantly under firelight. The tomb has floors that are adorned with intricate pattern work and less reflective mosaic art. So let's look at one of the lunettes in the tomb of Megala Placidia in Ravenna. And you can see that in early Christian art, we went from this work of art with Jesus on the cross that was presented in a more plebeian style to now this image of Christ that is starting to look a little bit more royal, a little bit more aristocratic. This lunette is done in deep blue and a light blue mosaic tiles. The thing that you need to understand about the mosaic tiles, we call them tesserae, and they were about the size of a quarter. So if you can kind of wrap your head around how many little tiny quarters it took to tile the ceiling, it's pretty remarkable in terms of skill. In addition to the fact that these were very skilled craftsmen, the tesserae sometimes had a mirror on one side and glass on the other. And so it would create this sense of reflection in the work of art. Now, they wouldn't use the tesserae in every little spot, but when you shine a light on it, like they have done to take the picture, it flattens everything out and you don't see the mirrored tesserae come forward. Remember that these were never meant to be looked at in this bright spotlight. They were meant to be looked at in the firelight. And so in the firelight, because the tomb itself doesn't have any natural windows, it has one or two small slits to allow light to come in. Anytime you went into the tomb, you would be going in with firelight. And the tesserae that had the mirrors on the back of them, or the metal on the back of them, would have come forward in space, and the ones that didn't have the metal on the back would have receded into space. And so you would get a sense of depth that way. Right now, we see a mosaic motif that seems to carry on into the first golden age of Byzantine. And this is the beginning of a style that we call the imperial style. You see Christ sitting in the center of the lunette. He is tending to his sheep, who are his flock. And you can see that the line work is heavily emphasized in the sheep's fur coats, as well as in Jesus's robing. Notice the purple stole that wraps around Jesus's waist and up around his shoulder. He's still being presented as the shepherd, which was a plebeian job. But that purple, rich, royal stole indicated power and wealth. We saw that purple stole wrapped around Augustus's waist when we looked at the portrait of Augustus in the beginning of the Roman Empire. If you remember, that stole was what was created from the old Republican way of dressing. Purple is an interesting color. It is made from snails that are located in Asia. And so having purple in your mosaic would mean that you had good trade relations. It was a status symbol. You can see how much the Byzantine people love pattern. The ceiling has beautiful floral motif pattern, and then the lunette has a narrative to it. You get a sense of space based on how the sheep are stacked within the space, and how Jesus sits forward on the rock and the sheep seem to sit behind him. The linear treatment of the fur is somewhat stylized, but you're going to see that these mosaics take on a beautiful variation in patterning to accommodate skin tone and to accommodate the roundness of an object. So we're going to look at that very closely. Um, the early Christian artists really loved patterning, and so we see lots and lots of pattern. The robes that Christ wear are typical of the patrician's attire. And so this becomes the very first scene that suggests that fusion of the imperial style with the plebeian style, or the plebeian job of keeping watch over the flock of sheep. This is the miracle of the loaves and the fishes. It is a mosaic in the top register of the nave wall of the clerestory windows of St. Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna. That's that church that I said to keep in the back of your mind. This particular work of art is important because it's the first time that Jesus is presented completely as a patrician. You see that he has this crown around his head. That halo that he wears around his head is stacked with beautiful precious gems. You can see around the border of the work of art these small round spaces here that are surrounded in gold. Those are precious gems, usually rubies and emeralds and sapphires. Jesus is performing the miracle of the loaves and fishes when he goes to preach, and the disciples come to him and say, all these people are hungry. They've been here for 3 days listening to you talk. And Jesus says, here, feed them with this fish and this loaf of bread. And they say, wait a minute, that's not enough to feed thousands of people. And he said, go try it and see what happens. And they feed thousands of people with 1 fish and 4 loaves of bread. So that's the story behind the image. You can see that the people have a sense of flatness to them. We call that flatness isophalic. It means a sense of repetitiveness and lack of depth. Almost like if you had a cookie cutter and you were making gingerbread men and you stacked them one in front of each other, that's isophalism.